Quilt Co. I'm Danae. Today we are going to sew a traditional quilt block, the granny square. Granny squares are wonderful because there are endless block size and style options when making this block. It's also a great block for beginners. It's pre-cut friendly, it's great if you have fabric you want to fussy cut, and it's perfect for your scraps. Today I'm making the last block I need to finally finish my Pixie Noel granny square quilt top. Granny square blocks can be made using any size square, and you can make them as large or as small as you want, adding or subtracting layers until you get your desired size. Here's an example of a layout using 2.5 inch squares. Here's another layout using 4.5 inch squares. And for today, we are going to be using 3.5 inch squares. For the block we're going to make, we need 1 block for the center, 4 of one print, 8 of another, and 12 squares of our background fabric. Here, I have my block laid out the way I want it. If you decide to fussy cut for your granny square block, pay careful attention to how you cut your squares. Make sure that the design is going in the direction you want it to in the final quilt top. From here, we are going to sew each row together using a 1/4 inch seam. We're going to start with this row and sew these 3 blocks together. Now let's grab the next row and sew these 5 squares together, again using our 1/4 inch seam. Then we're going to continue on sewing these next 3 rows just how we did our first 2, sewing each square together using our 1/4 inch seam. Here we have our rows sewn together, and I've pressed the seams in alternating directions in each row so our seams will nest. They will look like this. One row pressed this way, the next row pressed this way, and so on. Now we are going to line up our seams and sew our rows together using our 1/4 inch seam. I like to use these fork pins at each intersection where the seams have nested, so nothing shifts while I'm sewing. So I'm gonna go ahead and line it up, feel how they kind of hook on there, make sure everything looks good, put in a fork pin. At that intersection, do the same thing, line it up, feel how it locks right in together, and put my fork pin in. Now I'm gonna head to the sewing machine and sew my 1/4 inch seam. My first 2 rows are sewn together. Now I'm gonna come back and add on a 3rd row. I'm gonna nest my seams and then add a fork pin. Make sure that one feels right, add it in there. This one needs to come up. Now I'm gonna head to the sewing machine and again sew my 1/4 inch seam, and I'm gonna continue with the next 2 rows. Here's the block all sewn together, including these individual squares at the top and the bottom. Now we're ready to press our block. We're gonna set all of our seams. And then for my granny square blocks, I like to press away from the center. So we're gonna go get in there and press our seams away from that center block. Come up here and do the same. Go ahead and do this side, pressing away. Oops. In order to get really flat seams, which will make our overall quilt top less bulky, I like to spritz a little water at this point, set my iron down on my seam, hold it for 4 or 5 seconds, and then set my clapper on top and scoop my iron down. And continue that for all my seams until my whole block is pressed. Now we're ready to trim our block. Before we trim, we need to make sure that we are leaving a 1/4 inch space past each point. That way we won't lose any of the points in our seam when we sew our blocks together. A little more than a 1/4 inch is fine as long as all of your blocks are the same size. So I'm gonna go ahead, take my block, get my ruler, set my 1/4 inch on all my points. Here, make sure all of them. There we go. And now I'm ready to make my first cut. Slide these away. Go ahead and twist it. We'll line this one up. The 1/4 inch seam again on our ruler on all 3 points. Making sure also to line up our ruler with the cut we just made to make sure our block is gonna be square. And we're gonna cut. Two more sides. And cut. And last one. Line up our points. And cut. And here we have an adorable granny square block. Now that I've got my final block complete, I'm hoping to have this quilt top together in no time. I hope this inspires you to make your first or your next granny square quilt. A granny square in Bonnie and Camille's April showers has been on my to make list for years, so hopefully that'll be in my near future. As always, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. See y'all next time.